Hello everybody, Logan here, and today we are going to be talking about the Nintendo GameCube. This is my favorite Nintendo console, so let's see what it has to offer. The GameCube was first conceived in 1998 when Nintendo partnered with the company RX, composed of former Silicon Graphics members, to create a successor to the Nintendo's current console, the Nintendo 64. This just goes to show you that Nintendo saw the sales figures of the 64, and after only 2 years they're like, yeah, it's time to move on. In 1999, Nintendo publicly announced the GameCube under the working title, codenamed Dolphin, with IBM making the CPU and the graphics processor by RX, who would later be bought out by ATI a year later. One neat fact is that the name Dolphin is referenced everywhere in the system. The graphics processor is codenamed Flipper, the system model number, and even some games straight up reference it, such as the shape of Mario Sunshine's Isle Delfino. About 6 months prior to the system's launch, Nintendo released the Game Boy Advance. During this time, they sort of used the GBA as a stopgap between the 64 and the GameCube, as they had recently pulled all of the current N64 projects up to the GameCube. In fact, the last N64 game came out during this time, before the GameCube even launched. The GameCube came out in Japan on September 14th, 2001, under the appropriate abbreviation of NGC, when the rest of the world got GCN for some reason. It came equipped with Dolby Pro Logic 2 surround sound, and was the first Nintendo console to use optical disc instead of cartridge or floppy disk. There was one drawback to the new format, however. You see, Nintendo was originally going to make a standard DVD-sized disc drive with DVD support, but because Nintendo is always worried about privacy, they made these really small discs that could only hold 1.5 gigabytes of storage, when the competing Xbox and PlayStation 2 could both hold up to 8 gigabytes. Curiously enough, Panasonic did release a GameCube that also played normal DVDs. This was called the Panasonic Q, and it is quite rare these days because of how expensive it was at launch. Lastly, this was the first main Nintendo console that supported internet connectivity with games. The console itself had 15 launch titles, with the obvious headliner being Luigi's Mansion, which made this the first Nintendo console not to launch with a traditional Mario game, and it was the first mainline game to star Luigi instead of Mario. But if Luigi's Mansion just isn't your thing, a week later, Super Smash Bros. Melee came out, which completely refined the standards from the first Smash game. And that's the beauty that the GameCube had, taking old series and genres and putting its own little twist on it. Let's go through a few. We have Metroid Prime, which was the first Metroid game since the Super Nintendo, accompanied with a whole new 3D first-person shooter style of gameplay. We have Mario Kart Double Dash, which was the first and only Mario Kart game to have 2 people per kart, and it even supported up to 16 different players with LAN play. There was F-Zero GX, every Mario sports game had an entry on this console, and Animal Crossing was introduced to the West. And finally, there's no way that I could make a video on the GameCube without bringing up Super Mario Sunshine. Other than being my favorite Mario game of all time, this game also brought us innovation in platforming by introducing the Flood Pack, and just overall refined the 3D platforming genre. So, as you can see, there not only were a lot of great games, but the GameCube was also the last Nintendo console to not skip any big franchises as well. As far as I'm aware, the only one missing was a traditional Kirby game, but that was about it, which is pretty impressive considering how the Wii and Wii U notorious left out a few franchises. Nintendo even did a few collaborations by letting other companies use their characters, such as Soul Calibur 2 featuring Link and Dance Dance Revolution Mario Mix. And speaking of third parties, how was third-party support? It was okay. You can definitely tell there's a lot more than the N64 had, but there is a noticeable lack of third-party support compared to the Xbox and PS2. But overall, I'd say the GameCube had a near-perfect software lineup for a Nintendo console. But even if there are good games, some people care deeply about graphics, and lucky for them, the GameCube looks absolutely beautiful, even to this day. Like, you can tell it isn't HD or anything, but it still looks great, especially when compared to the Nintendo 64. And if we're comparing the GameCube to the N64, we gotta mention the excellent controller. I'm sure most people know this by now, but the GameCube controller was near perfect because of a few key design choices, with those being analog triggers, comfortable grips, the octagon joystick gate, and finally, the button placement. It may seem a bit odd to outsiders, but having the buttons placed in order of importance allows you to find each button without having to look down. So obviously you'd use the A button the most, so why not have every other less important button surround it? The only problems I can think of about this controller is that it has only one Z button, and that the D-pad was made for ants. But other than that, the controller is great, and they know it too because with the release of every new Smash Bros., they reissue old GameCube controllers, and then they make adapters to use the controllers for that game. And so for this reason, the GameCube will probably never die completely. And I think the last thing we need to cover is the Game Boy Advance compatibility. So some games had a feature where you could connect your GBA in order to get special benefits, such as the Tiny Chow Garden in Sonic Adventure DX and Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. But some games, such as Pac-Man Vs. and Legend of Zelda 4 Swords Adventures, required you to have the Game Boy Advance connected to enhance your gameplay. And finally, we have one of the greatest add-ons Nintendo has ever created, the Game Boy Player. This little add-on pops onto the bottom of your GameCube and allows you to play nearly any Game Boy game on your TV. And while this is conceptually similar to the Super Game Boy units, the Game Boy Player obviously has the edge by allowing you to play with any Game Boy game. Well, aside from the video cartridges, but would you really want to see video blown up to that size? And that is basically a crash course on the Nintendo GameCube. And while it wasn't as popular as the PS2 or Xbox, I feel it's most fondly remembered of the generation. I don't know why, but perhaps it's because that's where the classic Nintendo kind of died. With the release of the Nintendo DS and Wii in 2004 and 2006 respectively, Nintendo moved away from their hardcore fans and went to focus more on the casuals. I personally believe this is a funny twist of irony, considering that a lot of people didn't like the GameCube when it was new because of some missed expectations. Some examples are that some people wanted a mature Zelda game when they got a cartoonish one with Wind Waker, or some people thinking that Mario Sunshine wasn't as innovative as Mario 64 was before it. But once it died and Nintendo started changing their focus, people saw how great the GameCube really was, and I wouldn't want that any other way. And that is about all I have for today. Thank you guys all for watching, and I would like to know, what is your favorite console and if you like the GameCube as much as I do. And with that, take care.